Powerful women, they may call them aggressive. It's why when women enter politics, the media focuses on trivialities like their pattern sense and not their skills and program or platform. Now let me talk a little bit about gender. For us to have a clear understanding of globalization and culture as everyday lived experiences, it's important that we explore the meanings of gender. And I'm not going to say quite what you expect me to. So please listen closely. Globalized capital and transnationalized production, biotechnology, and internationalized media are gendered phenomena. They affect women and men differently. Sometimes they also affect women and men in the same ways. Women and men who are located within the same institutional and social structures, thus, will have overlapping experiences that are based on structural commonalities of class position and identity. Gender analysis initially focused on the recovery, excavation, rehabilitation of women's history. But this significant and groundbreaking work must be carried forward through the inclusion of men, given that gender is a relational concept that is socially constructed. Gender relations, therefore, are, and I quote, constituted within a cultural, economic, and political system which is also historically situated. These systems involve race, ethnicity, class, and other forms of inequality that must be incorporated into any gender analysis. Moreover, I'll skip. So I see gender as historically contingent and constructed, simultaneously embedded in material relations. So in the fabric of everyday life, you see gender. In social institutions and in cultural meanings, gender is bound up with inequalities, not only in the often dominant relation that we see between men and women, but also in the relations of class and race and in the marketplace. Do women have power? Mainstream feminists tell us that we live in a male-dominant world and patriarchy is the order of the day. Many in this room would probably agree. The essence of patriarchy is that women have no power, whether in the public or the private sphere. They are also assumed to belong to the private sphere, tied to the home and hearth, and hot wire that is programmed to fulfill domestic functions of reproduction and the allied acts connected with it. They birth children, they nurture them, they have to nurture their spouse, elder care, care of the sick, food processing, cleaning and cooking, frantically budgeting, quietly subsidizing and supplementing spousal income when it is inadequate, and deferring to the almighty spouse who, as the privileged male, is the head of the household, is expected of women. Many people would confidently tell you this and say, this is our culture. But our culture is multidimensional, and I will try to explore some aspects of it. Now, if one is operating from this perspective, if women were to make a foray into the public sphere, they would be co-opted into a men's world where all meaningful positions of power are occupied by men. For a woman to advance in such a world, she would need to intern as the protege of a male patron who helps and grooms her for quote-unquote success. And that is if she plays her cards right. Naturally, the women who succeed in this kind of sphere would be those who learn and take to heart the strategies guaranteed to propel them to higher realms of success. These strategies are often those associated with males in the popular culture. Being cold, being dispassionate, being aggressive, being hard-driving, and determined to succeed at all costs. However, for learning and internalizing these traits, women are described as aggressive, while their successful, in quote, male counterparts are adulated and elevated. Now, women are thus scrutinized is indicative of how their objectification in popular culture affects perceptions of how they should be and what they should do in all aspects of life. Thus, good dressing trumps common sense and substance, and an assertive woman, I'm repeating again, is derided. As objects, it's expected that women are dainty, decorative, demure, and these days, even in Nigeria, skinny and unobtrusive. However, we should also remember that there are significant differences among feminists on the nature of women and the relationship between them and power and politics. To add politics to the mix and to consider quickly the focus of our discussion today, we would do well to bear in mind that politics is ever-changing and so are the centers of power. We should also remember that women are not necessarily less politically active than men, but given the persistence of patriarchy, they have far less access to political activities that will give them public, official, and high-level power. And also, it's because institutionalized politics are male-dominated and monopolized that women may play significant roles in the economy and society and still remain marginalized in the public sphere. This means that we may observe examples of women's non-institutional or even anti-institutional activities that empower them and help society in general, but they are kept in check and prevented from exercising power in a manner that they can exert influence and assert change over and for others. And as long as men operate a monopoly on power, the nature and distribution of that power will not change. The monopoly cannot possibly be challenged, I say, by those who hold it. Since they stand to lose when the status quo changes, it has to be challenged by those who are excluded. Also, challenging the status quo is necessary but not sufficient for meaningful change to occur. My point here is that women are badly represented in politics and that there are cultural and policy contexts that produce such a dreadful circumstance. But we should not take a simplistic understanding of culture as the final word on that concept. Instead, we need to think about the extent to which we can honestly say that African culture is homogeneous, and also the extent to which it is separable from other cultures that it has encountered over the millennia. So, when I make the claim that cultural contexts undergird the poor representation of women in politics, I see a conjuncture among Western and African institutional social practices that combine to discriminate against women and marginalize them. I also see notable examples in African history of women's power that scholars, including our chairperson of today, Professor Bolanle Awe, excavated and rehabilitated. She and other pioneers began the work of recording African women's history. They began to make them relevant to contemporary social needs in a way that recalls the first Ojuifa that I read in this presentation. I would have read it again, but I think for the interest of time, let's move on. This essay patterns much of what we consider today as crucial elements of the gendered nature of African societies on its head, and it reminds us in the first place that the presumed marginalization of women that occurs as a result of being married is not exactly as we think. Just to clarify what I have in mind, when one thinks of the gender order in African society, it's conventional to think of men having higher social status than women, and wives, of course, are seen as having lower status than husbands. I want to hasten to remind us that African societies are not necessarily gendered in the same ways as Western societies. One of the most relevant contributions of feminist research is that gender is socially constructed. Thus, Western societies are necessarily gendered differently than African societies. Among African societies too, gender does not operate in identical ways at all times. And in order to properly understand the African conceptualizations of gender power and leadership, I think we need more ethnographic research that continues to excavate, rehabilitate, and explicate as a preparation for theorizing these relations in an accurate and meaningful manner. That being said, our SAFA tells us that it is not only a woman that should hustle to be married, as we believe. Men also should, and no man is complete without a wife. For those who understand the essence of complementarity, a concept that Professor Awe and other pioneers emphasize in their work, this is not strange. Africans believe that it takes both the male and female to make a good society. This is emphasized in Professor Bolanle Awe's work, using the phrase, there's no harm in a man seeing a snake and a woman killing it as long as the snake dies. This saying allows for women's initiative, leadership, and bravery. Now, to what extent do women's issues? Now I'm in Nigeria. In New York, I probably not get that water. I was like, just get with it. Okay. To what extent do women's issues, which I simply define as those issues of direct relevance to women, get any play in public discourse and political decision making, even in our 21st century world? When I began by talking about the popular perceptions of women, I failed to mention that, like most of the public, political parties do not also draw support for their assumptions from the media. I'm glad we have the fourth realm here and its constructions of norms. Who can change this and how? Women must spearhead the efforts. And they have made efforts to do so over time, but the battle is not won. It is also indicative of the tendency to trivialize the contributions of women, that much of the efforts made by women to change society for the better have been erased and relegated to the margins of history. One important issue that should concern those interested in women's advancement in politics and their power in the economic and social systems is the matter of representation. And I'll also move on and jump over parts of my paper. I want to talk about the idea that women are subordinated to men in all human society. I ask the question, is this general subordination the whole picture? Does it apply to human life in an unbounded manner that applies regardless of time and space? I think we should just get out of the way now and acknowledge that some women are oppressed, marginalized, and subordinated to men. But this is not the case for all women. And this should be something that gives hope to us. I want to turn to an exploration of women who were powerful in Nigerian and African history. Nigerian history is replete with examples of powerful women leaders, and the work of renowned historians like Professors Bolanle Awe, and I have to also reference late Nina Eba Mba, pioneered the documentation of these records of achievement. Princess Inepi of the Igala people, I first encountered in Professor Bolanle Awe's book. Efusheto Animura, I knew from, mythical renditions of, especially Ibadan history. Efusheto was the Yadode of Ibadan, and I know many people here know that. There was also Madame Tinubu, renowned trader, and Yadode of Abeokuta, and also a leader in the economic sphere, I would say, or the commercial sphere. There was also Queen Amina of Zawza, She was a warrior. She led her troops in battle. There was Queen Kambasa of Ujo and a warrior of Elisha. They all participated in political leadership and gained recognition for their accomplishments. And I have to really warn you, when I talk about these things, many people who are gender activists tell me that's in the past. Those women are in the aristocracy, and so whatever it is they experience is not relevant to ordinary women. And I do disagree strenuously, but I won't bore you by really going on the rant, as the young people say, about these matters. Let me stick to my subject. Princess Inipi and Moremi of Ife gave the ultimate sacrifice, life itself. Princess Inipi was the only child of the Igala ruler, and she was given as a sacrifice. Moremi sacrificed her only child, Oluoroko, to ensure the well-being of her people and end the wars that threatened to destroy them. Nana Asmau was a Muslim scholar and a poet. She lived from 1793 to 1864. She was a top scholar in Sokoto who taught and also participated in the running of the state behind closed doors from her matrimonial home by giving advice to the official ruler. The Aba Women's War of 1929 is a watershed event in Nigerian history, and I do know that many historians refer to it as the Aba riots. Riots excise from your consciousness. It was a women's war. And while this is recorded, the Aba Women's War that is, and discussed in historical texts, its significance, I'm arguing, is yet to be fully contextualized. Not only did Igbo women, through the tireless and mobilization efforts of their village associations, organize a formidable resistance to colonial efforts to tax Igbo women. They were so effective against colonialism that they were not taxed until after colonial rule ended. Mrs. Fumilayo Ransom Kuti was a Nigerian feminist. She was born in 1900. She challenged the myth of male superiority by challenging patriarchy. She also fought for suffrage and equal rights for Nigerian women. She joined the struggle for Nigerian independence as an activist in the anti-colonial movement. And through many of the plots that she started, there was adult education program for women in Abeokuta. She also challenged the power of the Alape Ademola at the time, who was Oba of Bielba. He was forced to abdicate the throne for injustices against the people of Abeokuta, particularly in siding against his own people to foster the interests of colonial rule. Mrs. Kuti was the only woman in the Nigerian delegation to the 1954 Constitution talks in London. And among her peers are other women like Lady Oyinkan Abayomi, Mrs. Margaret Eko, Alaji Dumami Alaga, Madam Pelewura. All of these women participated in nationalist struggles against colonial rule. Lady Abayomi was also tireless in advocating for and facilitating the provision of women's education. She also contributed to founding the Nigerian Women's Party after the Second World War. So if you look at the history of other African countries, we see people like Huda Sharawi, an educator and a women's activist who was born in Cairo in 1879. She was forced into marriage at the age of 13 as a result of societal and familial pressure. She resented all the restrictions to women's movement and dress, and she organized lectures that brought many women out into public spaces. In 1910, she opened a school for girls that focused on academic subjects and not just domestic arts. She also established a welfare society for poor women. In 1919, she organized the largest women's anti-British demonstration in Egypt. And that same year, she assisted in founding the Egyptian Feminist Union. And there are other women. I think if I keep recounting all these, we're going to be here forever. But I want to reference some of their names. There was Doria Shafik, born in Egypt in 1908. She also was a fierce feminist, poet, publisher, and political activist. From Sierra Leone, we have Constance Agatha Collins John, who was born in 1818. She eventually worked her way to becoming the first woman mayor of Freetown Municipality. Now let me go and talk about the issue of poverty and how it ties in with power and gender. When many people look upon Africa, they conclude that the continent is so poor, so marginalized, that its women are the most embattled, the most oppressed, the most impoverished people on earth. Being all of the above, could these same women be powerful? Could they be leaders? As I said in an earlier paper, given the manner in which the African women in the global economy are embattled, and given their relative absence in terms of their faces and bodies at worldwide conferences and activist gatherings, given the relative absence of their voices in intellectual discourse, and given their relative scarcity among the official power holders in their countries of origin, how could one possibly not consider them voiceless, powerless, more likely to be acted upon than to act on their own behalf? Now, in order to begin to challenge the pervasive cosmopolitanism that homogenizes and essentializes women's experiences, I want to explore multiple ways in which African women exercise and deploy power and lead despite the economic and the social and the political constraints that they face, to show that women have an illustrious history to inspire them, and they can take their power from any political system that is bent on ignoring them. Do women have any power in an African society? Under what circumstances? I'm asking these questions because I'm a Yoruba woman. And in my personal experience, I'm aware that the studies that posit the automatic powerlessness of women as a group vis-à-vis all men do not explain my own experience or my understanding of history. Many of the studies also may indicate the existence of oppression as a very real human situation, but they do not give any idea of the richness and vibrancy of life as it exists, as I know it. In Africa and elsewhere, class differences among women imply that some women are granted social, political, and economic privileges that are not open to others, including men. Professor Awe said this in 1992 publication. Johnson, Ojim, and Iba said this in their 1997 publication. An African woman who does not understand her history and continues to believe in the Western origins of progress in human life rejects the possibility of drawing upon the legacy of strength among her female predecessors. This tendency is directly connected, I argue, to colonization, which more than any other phenomenon caused African culture to be interpreted as a disability, as the fountain of reprehensible traditions that hold women back and subsume them under the weight of patriarchy. Becoming modern was taken as a result of colonialism to mean aping the Western colonizer. If we take the feminist contention that gender is socially constructed seriously, it is inevitable that constructions of gender differ from one geographical location to another. Thus, the gendering of society, and I see that I'm repeating myself, is for good reason. Gendering of society in Africa does not automatically take on the same form as we observe in the Western world. Africa has 54 countries. Nigeria, which has the largest population, has more than 250 ethnic groups. Some people say more than 500. Some people say up to 600 and something. I'm not exactly sure. Please excuse this gap in my knowledge. But I don't think we've concluded yet how many ethnic groups we have. It's to be expected that a myriad of cultural differences make the social constructions of any category more complex than in the West. Since almost the entire continent of Africa was colonized, today one observes the combination of pre-colonial culture with elements absorbed as a result of the experience of colonization. Colonization continues today, I argue, facilitated by the neoliberal economic ideology of integration, by the technological innovations that have eased communication, thus increasing the abilities of the owners of technology to have tremendous cultural influences on those who lack it, or who lack the most powerful or the most recent technology. Now, women and power in African society I want to return to. And the circumstances under which they may have power, and the influence of women's power or weakness. I want to make this initial claim that women may have power in society in the following institutions. They may have power in the family, in kinship groups, in community, in the ethnic group, and the state. In the context of African indigenous culture, instances of power would include women's power as mothers vis-a-vis children, regardless of age. And the Yorubas also have an adage that says, there is no deity like the mother. It is mothers that we ought to worship. As women could also have power in terms of the wifely order in polygynous families. The first wife has more power than the other co-wives. The loved wife may trump that, when that occurs. As political officials, the examples of women who are queen mothers among the Edo of Nigeria, the Buganda of Uganda, and the Akan of Ghana. I think also among the Ondo people. Women can also have economic power based on their ability to own the means of production, or the ability to control the gains that they make from exchange. There are also examples of women's ritual power. Some of them are priestesses, some are the deities that we know in African indigenous religious traditions. African traditions that invest women with the right to hold and exercise power have to be recovered from the detritus of past and contemporary history. Such recovery can be construed as facilitating the improvement of our understanding of not just what the mores and ethos of African cultural traditions are, but of the restoration of the philosophies and deep meanings that underlie our social practices. Scholarly responsibility entails saving from obscurity those valuable practices that define the essence of the human experience in African traditions. If such effort bears fruit, the wounds inflicted by past skewed and biased representations and interpretations can be healed, and the values that undergird the recognition of the importance of women in society preserved. In consequence, if we rehabilitate these ideals, we will have our values revived, renewed, and energized. In the effort to undertake the excavation and recovery of progressive African traditions, consider once again the feminist contention that women are commonly oppressed by male patriarchy. It's relevant to ask the following questions. What are the defining characteristics of femaleness and maleness, strength and weakness? Have these characteristics remained the same over time and space? When did they change? And how are they changing? The comprehensive answer to these questions can only be answered through deep, focused research in all of Africa's regions. My analysis, as you can see, focuses heavily on the Yoruba of southern Nigeria. And this is a gap. But let me kind of use that as a way of showing some of the possibilities that exist. Among the Oyo Yoruba, historically, seniority is as important as gender. as a definitive category. As a matter of fact, my friend would argue that seniority trumps gender. Temporary Yoruba adoption of Western gender categories is a direct consequence of the incorporation of the Yoruba into the world economy. First through trade relations, rapidly followed by the transatlantic slave trade, and then the so-called legitimate trade in quotes, European exploration, the scramble for territories in Africa by the various European powers of the late 19th century, colonization and decolonization are all the things that helped us to embrace more Western ideas of who the ideal human being ought to be and the norms that flow from that. The post-colonial history of the Yoruba is necessarily deeply impacted by this historical progression from trade to decolonization. This progression, excuse me, you can see my mother is a progression. This progression also should be seen as part of the process of globalization. The most current phase of globalization continues to have a deep impact on Yoruba, Nigerian, and African peoples. Despite such impact, scholarship that excavates people's history for deep philosophical meaning will reveal a world sense that differs from the Western, and that would be a notable contribution to human knowledge and human civilization. Let me talk a little bit about women as political officials. Political power is not limited to women within Yoruba society. Yoruba princesses can marry commoners who may then be conferred with titles, including Obaship, as Johnson claims is the case of the Olowo, son of the firstborn of Oduduwa. There are still contemporary examples of female Ijoye or chiefs. There are Iyalode, Erelu, Yeyoba. Those are just a few of such female positions. Today, as with the Obaships, these positions are denuded of power, being only ceremonial vestiges of their pre-colonial manifestations. That they remain and that the holders attract the respect and admiration of the public is an indicator of the persistence of norms and values that do not conform to a Western delimited understanding of gender. The Oyo Empire and other Yoruba states show us evidence of the institutionalization of women's political power into centralized political realms in a manner that demonstrates that anatomical and biological femaleness was not considered coterminous or the same thing with a disadvantaged gender. Social power was multiply determined, and whether an individual exercised power depended on what the political scientists call scope and domain. As a Iyalode, we have the examples of Efusheto Anibura of Ibadan and Madame Tinubu of Abeokuta. You find this if you read Professor Awe's book of 1977. These were powerful women of their times who exercised the power with which their office was endowed. And in the case of Efusheto Anibura, they were not adverse to engaging in power struggle and participating actively in war, albeit without through surrogates, as did many of their male counterparts. In the Oyo Empire, the Ilari, who were variously regarded as the keepers of the king's head or his bodyguard, were both male and female. According to Johnson, quote, every male Ilari has a female counterpart who is called his companion. The Ilaris themselves, by courtesy, call them their mother, unquote. They are both created at one and the same time, and they're supposed to seek each other's interests, although there must be no intimacy between them. The female Ilaris being the denizens of the king's harem, the only attention they are allowed to pay each other is to make exchange of presents at the yearly festival. In addition, Johnson also identified the ladies of the palace, who included 8 titled ladies, 8 priestesses, and other ladies of rank. The Ayaba, who who are the king's wives. As residents in the palace, all the women were termed ayaba, which is no indication of their being married to him. So I list these women in my paper I'm going to speak. There are also other important positions, and I'll move away from Oyo now and talk about the Ijebu. See, my mother is Oyo and my father is Ijebu. Among the Ijebu, and I'm not going to talk about the Ijebu much. Not because I don't have respect for my father, time. Among the Ijebu, women are members of the Oshogbo, which is the same institution as the Egba Ogboni, of which women are also members. In the pre-colonial era, these institutions served the function of schooling members in oratory and jurisprudence. It also functioned, or they functioned, as the National Court of Appeals among the Ijebu people. It had jurisdiction, that is the Oshogbo, over criminal cases, and was mandated to execute those convicted where warranted. The Ogboni House among the Egba was also used as a state prison when necessary. Most importantly, the institution was mandated to prevent monarchical absolutism as well as mass lawlessness. You find this if you read Professor Ademode's book of 1966. In the New Oyo Empire, a female official of the Ogboni represented the Alaafin and reported back to him on the council's deliberations. The institutional function of the Ogboni included serving as a check against the abuse of the power of the Oyonis. When viewed from the perspective of scholarly works of gender, the gendering of society may in and of itself render women as mothers not only as powerless, but as marginal to social, political, and economic life. And I have to talk about myself a little bit. I started my PhD in 1982, and I graduated in 1996. I had 2 children in between in New York, where I have no family. My husband and I started at the same time. He finished in the record 4 years. And I took the time to raise my children. It is a blessing, but it was very difficult when I was doing it. It's a blessing because my son, whom I quit school that time for, is now, I think he's the director of government relations for Microsoft USA. So, I didn't totally lose, but it was very hard for me to be on the money track because I had put myself on the fast track and I had to wait. And then, as I was getting ready to resume with vigor, I had another child 11 years after my first one, so I slowed down once again. That child is going to go to college next year. So I gained some, but I am not a fast track scholar because I am a mother. So when we think about motherhood, feminists tell us this is a heavy burden. In my own life, I have seen this. And I've seen it in the lives of other women that I have studied. We are constantly reminded that African women may have this burden of motherhood so heavy that they are never able to develop a sense of themselves. I think this is a myth. Constantly, we're also reminded that women are the weaker sex. Wars affect them more, we are told. Economic crisis prostrate them. They are the epitome of wretchedness. And statistics are deployed to confirm the reality of these depictions. I am not denying that women are burdened. I'm not contesting the existence of patriarchy. I'm not saying that there are no instances of gender-based oppression in contemporary Yoruba, Nigerian, and African society. What I claim, the assumption that undergirds my work is that women in African society exercise power in multiple ways that are difficult to acknowledge or recognize when we use the tools designed to study Western societies. In order to properly study African societies, we have to, as an initial condition, consider the reality that stares us in the face. African societies are different. We can learn valuable lessons on the human condition if we take them seriously. Gender is not deployed in the same manner in African societies as it is in the West. There are multiple conditions that we cannot explain using the tools of Western scholarship. I contend that if we really understand Yoruba, Nigerian, African culture, and the culture of the African diaspora, we will find a way of conveying meaning to what is observed in a manner that does what Professor Yai refers to as the task of the Benu-Benu. The Benu-Benu he defines as orator, or verbal carver, or critic. The Benu-Benu continues the work of the Benu-Benu, the carver. The Benu-Benu as the orator, the one who casts language with the mouth in presenting the verbal gloss on the work of the sculptor, must understand and successfully convey the meaning of concepts in a manner that captures both the spirit and the letter of the ideological and philosophical intent of the people in whose culture a practice is grounded. Another very important factor to realize is that if we accept that contemporary women are commonly oppressed by patriarchy, the agency that is primarily responsible is the state. The contemporary state was not created by Africans. It is a colonial imposition. Being so imposed, it bore, to paraphrase Amina Mama, the racial hierarchy and gender politics of 19th century Europe, as a result of which Africa was, quote, indoctrinated into an all-male European administrative system, and the insidious paternalism of the new religious and educational systems. This, she says, has persistently affected all aspects of our social, political, and economic life in post-colonial African states. So, people who love me are telling me to wind up, and I'm going to do that. The profound lack of determination. Okay. The profound lack of self-determination that pervades Africa should also be avoided through more critical examination of the theories, concepts, solutions that were designed to explain and solve problems in other places with historically distinct legacies. The reason is that under the lens of those theories and concepts, everything African begins to look absurd and pathological, as people like Mamdani argue. Under the influence of the imported solutions, African states and societies reel from one botched remedy to the next. Cosmopolitan and hybridized scholars then turn on the powerful imported lenses once again to proclaim that tradition is the problem. Instead, I call for a rethinking of the terms of Africa's ideological, cultural, economic, and political engagement with the hegemonic powers of the contemporary global system. As the traditionalized order, the most thoughtful response is to problematize tradition and emphasize its dynamism and complexity as a concept that describes not just something stuck in the dim, inaccessible past, but processes that are constantly being defined, reshaped, reformed, and rekindled. When these processes occur, tradition is transformed over and again. The assumption that tradition is irrevocably wedded to the past is wrong. The assumption that African tradition is a priori the zone of women's marginalization and oppression should be interrogated rather than accepted as a given. The opposite assumption that modernity is the zone of liberation also must be unpacked. That women had the opportunity to participate in the public sphere and wield power within the family prior to Africa's colonization is to possibility that arguments and struggles for African women's inclusion in the public sphere and in the exercise of power within the family do not have to be based on imported ideologies. Secondly, modernity is not an unproblematic phenomenon. It could either be oppressive or liberating. It could marginalize as well as centralize. It could, participation in the global system could be made more possible or made easier through the mediating power of traditions that validate, empower, centralize the African women. The duty of the scholar as Beno and Benu is to use the right tools to create the right meaning and accurate interpretation. Now, I think I should stop, although my paper is not over, but I do thank you for giving me all this time to talk to you. About this very important subject. So I thank you very much. And I have one more thing. Okay. I have 2 new books. The first is West African Migrations, Transnational and Global Pathways in a New Century. I co-edited it with Professor Olufemi Yvonne, who is Jeffrey Canada Professor of History at Bowdoin College, and he's also the Director of the Africana Studies Program. And the second is Transnational Africa and Globalization, and I also co-edited it with him. The 2 books were published in January 2012 by Palgram Macmillan. And I'd like to present the 2 books to Siba. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your staying and listening, and I thank you.
Thank you very much for being very, very eloquent. People make the gesture. Thank you very much. I know you will help to the top of our feedback. I want to ask a question on child child, I'm sorry. For some years now, women have been fighting over to have the pressure from what we have been passing through from our men cultural backgrounds. And my question now is, having gone through these years of female liberation, we have the Beijing conference. Up to now, the women are still fighting to get liberated. And we have even done so far, having applied a lot of education. Then, what is the difference between the gap between education and culture? This can be the girl child.
The traditional lifestyle of the African society, to a very large extent, has contributed to the position in which they are today. Because we talk about modernity, we talk about the fact that contemporary society has created an avenue for the women to liberate themselves from this particular society. But I think that if we argue that there is a side of Africa, and we argue that culture is dynamic and it's an interaction between different societies, why then is the African woman in position in which she stays? Because I really don't think the traditional values have helped in women's liberation. I think the very like extent modernity of the contemporary society has helped in that liberation because of that exchange. Thank you.
I'm from National University of Education. I want to ask why history has been removed from schools. I think those of the history society must do something very ordinary so that history will be introduced into schools. We are losing our identity. Our children are not focusing on our identity. The other thing is, it's very sad if we leave this place without this lecture. The lecture we gave today is a must on the shelf of every woman. And please, we are asking SIVA to make sure that we all get the lecture, particularly as women, so that we all will toe in the line of the lecturer. Thank you very much for the lecture.
University of Lagos. As posited by W.E. Du Bois, that self-identity or self-knowledge is a basic prerequisite for self-actualization. And the level of self-identification or self-knowledge is very low among the women. And maybe this was the vocation by the ceremony of men in respect or in relation to the cultural background that we have in Nigeria and religious understanding. I want to ask if the majority of women are so politically inclined or are moving away from their own, do we not see that there will be a great error in our children or our nation development, in the sense that most of the core, most of the doctrinal tenets that will bring up children at home are left to the purview of women in this part of the world. Thank you.
Overcome in order for African women to escape the marginalization they are experiencing. And then, can it be said that African culture gave African women a way to marginalization? Now, my answer to those questions is that, I'm a political scientist, and I think I see politics in everything, including the proceedings of everyday life. And so, I think if we're really going to declare eyed about this, there's always been struggles for power between men and women. And when I talk about complementarity in African traditional values, what it evokes for me is the understanding that if you're going to emphasize either male-driven perspectives of society or entirely female-driven perspectives of society, you are going to fail. You need both in order to succeed. And that's the point of that poem, I knew a man cannot be, men in society cannot be successful, whether it's in political governance, or it's in economic planning, or it's in, doing the everyday social obligations that we are all engaged in. And so, I think that if we draw upon the positive aspects of our tradition, we can learn a lot, because there's history that demonstrates that women did have power. I think if we also look at even the confused things that we do in today's world, which is an admixture of traditional and indigenous ways and Western ways, Christian ways, Islamic ways, you still see elements of women's power. And it is possible to recover women's power, even under the thrall of male dominance. Women have done it before, and it is possible again. I think in order to, I didn't come to give a paper on the mechanisms of designing which people are operating, it's going to fail. And I want to say that if women have not attained power to the measure that is adequate to their numbers in Nigerian and African societies, this is why. The fact that we think we can just go take something from outside of Africa because it's working in America, it's going to work in Nigeria. By the way, marginalization and ignorance resides in Africa, and enlightenment resides in the West, is also a mistake for us to make. Because I think if we have power. However, if you conceded from the beginning that women never had power and women are never going to have power, it's never going to happen. And I did say also that if women are going to have power, it is women who are going to do the work of making sure that this is a reality. Because if we understand culture as oppression, we are succumbing to the colonial influences that determine to tell us that we are the other, and we are the ignorant, and we are the primitive. And I'm saying we are not. We have sufficient evidence in our history that points to women who had power even under patriarchy, and this is possible. So, now in terms of women's liberation, how do we define it? What traditional values affirm it? The fact that, to be frank, a woman in the West, people in the 1960s began to see that women could go out and work. In Africa, women had been working. African American women were also working during the days of slavery, in the post-slavery days, as sharecroppers and so forth. And this was what Sojourner Truth said when she made that speech. Ain't I a woman? That she has worked, so she's not fighting for the right to work. And she's as strong as any man because she has labored in the fields. And so, I think that as oppressed people, we need to confidently look into our history and recognize the valuable parts of our tradition. And historians have documented some of these things. We need to go to the books. If we don't know that women had power in pre-colonial societies, then we need to go read about it. Beijing didn't bring that. Women's liberation didn't bring that. And I want to also say about feminism, that women's power was not invented in the West. It is a part of human society in the African continent. If you go read some of the works of Sheikh and Tadio, he talks about matriarchy, and he kind of he traces some of the history from the 15th and 15th century onwards in Africa. If you look at Professor Awe's work, she documented examples of women who have who have historically made their mark on their society. And so, what I'm going to say is go to the books, go read. As young scholars, the people in the universities, you can also do original research that uncovers some of this history, instead of looking again and again to the West for solutions to the problems that we have. Why was history removed from the schools? That is a totally unforgivable omission. I think history belongs front and center in the schools, and we need to also emphasize African history and teach African history from a perspective that puts Africa front and center instead of in the margins. Because the way we learn history, we kind of tend to think that civilization means Europe, and primitivity means Africa. If we didn't believe that, many of the questions that we are asking will not come up. And we need to go back and look at our history and foreground our history in our scholarly inquiry. Now, people like Professor J.F. Ajayi, people like late Adu Buahen in Ghana, and the UNESCO African History Series, they laid a groundwork that began to look at African history from a non-Eurocentric perspective. I think people today need to build on that, instead of believing that nobody ever did anything in the past, and now we're going to foreground African history again. This also is not productive. We all stand, if we want, on the shoulders of African giants. We should adulate them, we should read their work, and we should also put it into practice. Now, W.E.B. Du Bois, self-identification and self-knowledge. If you don't know yourself and you don't know your history, you are going to be manipulated, you are going to be even defined out of existence. And you are going to be told that you are pathology personified. And this is the fate of Africa in the academy still today. And many Africans also buy into this. Now, have women had power? I dare say women have had power. Have they had this power in a way that transformed the societies that they lived in a way that all women across the board have power? That hasn't happened again. That would be the revolution. I don't think women's power that doesn't also incorporate the interests of men is going to be successful. Because I don't think that power that, a kind of vision of power that marginalizes anybody is appropriate. We are all valuable, and we should have power in an equitable way that is indicative of the proportionality that we see in our society. So more women need to be in power, and there are ways that other people have done this in African countries. Now, if Liberia produces an a woman president, there's no way that we can say Nigeria is not capable of doing it. All that it means is, like an old colleague who is now late used to say, don't agonize, organize. So women need to get off, get into the front lines and work on challenging marginalization on the home front, in the economy, socially, and in politics. And I say it is possible.
It's not all the time that we have a royal father seated amongst us, since the morning, patiently listening to us. I think we also want to listen to Kabiyesi Nnadi give out our presence, give the apparent. So quickly I call on DJ Silva to please.
On behalf of the Center for Black Americana I refer to you, ma'am, in opening of our application of your presence and of your very illuminating letter. Today, the day of our Lord, the 28th day of February 2020. Thank you very much.
The chairman, Ariba, Professor Bolande, Awe. It's unimaginable that I'm sitting very close to this great woman, because in 1975 or 1976, this woman was a commissioner in the old Western state. In 1975, I was just a U.S. student, or a physical student in the General Polytechnic. She's a great woman. And for all my generation, we can't forget. We pray for you. Thank you, Mama. May the good Lord continue to bless. Professor Olorun Fudeli, they are seated. These are 8 men. Professor Akinobi Shola, another fantastic man. Please, I'm mentioning these great Nigerians to our young ones, that you have people to look up to. It's a choice to make. In terms of relevance forever, because these are great men that will be relevant until they are no more, or even after they might have gone. So it is not that I want to be a billionaire that is the rat race amongst our young ones now. These are builders. These are builders. They build so many people. And it's a joy to see them today. We thank you that you are here. And if the good Lord will continue to expand your tribe in this great Nigerian lives. Be that as it may, the women have no costume. They are doing very well, I will stand there. If you look at the judiciary in Lagos, 90% of judges that we have in Lagos are women. And I've been doing statistics, I've been doing a comparative studies since about 11, 12 years ago with my children. You notice that in most schools now, in terms of performance, girls always lead in almost all the classes. That is a statement of fact. And for us lawyers, the result in the Nigerian law school almost the last 10 years, you find out that ladies have been leading in terms of performance. So it's just a matter. I know that it is a matter of time, but again, as a traditional ruler, I know that there are problems. And I'm facing that problem as a ruler, as a cabinet. My Yahweh is not a member of my cabinet. And I told my chief, my senior chief, that, wow, I can't imagine you not to have a representative, a leader in our own right, she's a king. Not to be a member of my cabinet. And the aged amongst an old man, about 102, I have to defer to him. That is, we did not meet it like that. It is unimaginable. It is a taboo. That is, if we do it, we are going to see the repercussion.
So it's a gradual thing, and I know that at a point in time, I'm going to behave as a king should behave. You know, most monarchs are dictatorial. And I don't say Yagode be part of my family. Again, I know that when I became the king, there was segregation. In fact, the women chiefs were not sitting with the male chiefs. It was a taboo. Because when I asked them, they said, can they see? I won't be on my road. I won't be on my road. But they are enjoying the mix-up now. When we are meeting, in the larger house, when we are meeting, they now see the beauty of having women amongst men. Be that as it may, we are doing very well. And I cannot imagine the volume of money that I spend on my daughters and the love that I have for my daughters. And someone will tell my daughters that we cannot leave. Definitely, my daughter must leave. Thank you.
Please, I will give you that is the royal intervention. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the chairperson, representative of the Honorable Minister, it is my pleasure on this note to call on Mr. Shedrack Y. Gulen, Deputy Director, Admin and Human Resources Management, to please thank everybody for being part of this historic Black History Month. Mr. Gulen.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. IDC. The chairperson of this occasion, Professor Bolande Away. I wish to start on the existing protocol to give this word of thanks. We've spent so much time here, we are hungry, we are thirsty, so we'll just take some few minutes to give a word of thanks. Maybe 30 minutes. 30 minutes is too much. On behalf of the General of the Center for Black Professor Jimmy I want to appreciate him for being here with us. In his own right as Director of Culture, he could have been here himself as a person, but we thank him for ably representing the Honorable Minister. We'd like to thank the Chairperson, Professor Bolande Awe, for really finding time to be here. Those of us who are students of history are very proud of her because of her achievements and her accomplishments. Ma, thank you very much for being part of this program. We'd also like to thank our royal father here, Oba Dokun Abolarin, the Orogun of Okeila. In fact, he's not just a royal father, but he's a member of the Sibak family. Has been part of our programs. He has never relented in efforts to be part of our programs. KBC, we want to thank you for being part of this program. We also want to thank the guest lecturer, Professor Okome, who has traveled all the way from the United States of America to be part of this program. The lecture has been very sumptuous, very delicious, and I'm sure we've learned a lot. I believe that the women enjoyed it more. She's talking about women liberation, but just fight for women liberation outside their homes. Don't go to your husband and begin to demand for liberation. Some of you may receive some beatings. We want to thank you, Ma, for really being a guest lecturer and for really giving us this very wonderful lecture. We would like to thank and appreciate the Permanent Secretary of the Federal Ministry of Tourism, Culture and National Orientation, who is ably represented here by the Director of Tourism. Madam, we want to appreciate your coming. We will continue to thank you for being part of our own programs. We want to thank the Vice Chancellor of the University of Ibadan this afternoon Also want to thank the director of the African Institute of Studies, the Institute of African Studies, for being represented here. We appreciate the collaboration that we're having with the Institute, and we believe that the two parties will continue to benefit from this collaboration. I want to thank the representatives of the chairman of the Senate Committee on Culture and Tourism, who have been here since yesterday. I want to appreciate you for being part of this program. And for many others that are on the high table, I may not be able to mention all their names. Professor Olumeriteni, Professor Ishola, and many others distinguished people on the high table, professors of higher repute. We want to appreciate their being here. Also want to appreciate NANTAP. NANTAP performed here in the morning. We appreciate the various dance groups that came in here. We want to appreciate the press and the various secondary schools that were here and are still here. We want to appreciate the students of the University of Lagos. We want to appreciate students of the University of Ibadan. And I'm sure there are students from one of the university here. Some of us are from there, but we are here with you. Ladies and gentlemen, lastly but not the least, we'd like to thank the organizing committee for a job well done. To all of you that are here present, we want to appreciate you. We want to say thank you for being part of this program. We want to thank the MC because he has done a wonderful job. MC, I think you are a wonderful person. God will continue to strengthen you. To all of us, please don't be tired of being part of SIBA programs. We'll appreciate you at all times. And as you go back to your respective homes, we pray that the good Lord will take you back safely in Jesus' name. God bless you and remain blessed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Golden. Please, we will move from here to the Institute of African Studies for the art exhibition. Let us rise for the national anthem. Thank you.
The representative of the Federal Minister for Tourism and National Orientation, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this is not going to take your time. It's a very brief ceremony. It's my pleasure to invite, on behalf of the Honorable Minister, Federal Minister of Tourism, Culture and National Orientation, the Director of Culture, Alhaji Mukhtar S. Abdul Kadir, to cut the tape to declare the exhibition open.
It is my great honor and privilege to declare this exhibition open on behalf of the Honorable Minister of Tourism, Culture and National Orientation by cutting the tape.
Thank you very much, sir. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the exhibition is now open and we are all free and invited to go around. Thank you.
We have works covering contemporary and traditional times and celebrating women in their different capacities as mothers, wives, daughters, friends, and accomplished professionals. I want to say before any other thing that the list we have here, the exhibit, the pictures are not exhaustive. So it's not possible to have everything, every picture of accomplished Black and African women here in this discipline. Give honor to Honorable Steve, starting with our President, His Excellency Dr. Ibele Jonathan, incoming Minister for Tourism, Culture and National Orientation, and our eminent Director General, Professor Tunde Bakawale. Here we come to the first of the pictures. Rosa Parks. She came into prominence in 1955 when she refused to give a seat to the black man inside the bus. And that refusal began a series of agitation to protest segregation in the United States of America. One would have thought that being a mother to Ella Adebayo Kuti and Professor Likoye and some Kuti and Beko and some Kuti, and it should have been enough glory for a woman. But Professor Kuti in our own capacity was also an institution. I mean, we are all aware of what she did in America when she made the then Alakia in that to applicate the throne. She was a political activist. Here we are, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the first female president in Africa. We have here Maya Angelou, an accomplished American writer. She's famous for portraying Black and African roles, especially female roles in our novels. She's very popular for that. We move to Gabo Sawaba. Despite of the nature, the apple is there, the northern part of Nigeria. It was not fashionable for them to send children, girls of between, but in spite of that, she overcame that. Popular for that. We moved to Miriam Makeba. She was the first black female musician to popularize African music globally. Miriam Makeba, she died recently, so a few years ago. Then Grace Alele Williams, professor, the first female vice chancellor of the University of Benin. I mean, in Nigeria, but then she was the vice chancellor of the University of Benin. And our mother here, Professor Bolanle Awe, a prominent historian and administrator. And I grew up knowing Professor in the old Western region as commissioner. I was very small then. With the likes of Kolake, Guati, Biya, Oja, and so many in the, it used to be common questions in current affairs then. You're welcome, man. Then Condoleezza Rice, she's another professor and the first female to get to the cabinet position of Secretary of State. That's a very big position in America. And Toni Morrison. Recently, Professor Morrison was interviewed and he was asked that though he's learned, he's a brilliant scholar, but he must still be reading some books. And what books does he read? He said he reads Toni Morrison, the first black female to get the Nobel Award for Literature. Our history, especially the Benin history, she was a woman who was reputed to have single-handedly raised an army to overthrow a king who forced himself on the people. The motto raised a woman raising an army to overthrow a king, and a legal one for that matter. To playmate, 3 figures, it's a very popular art. It is an art even in itself, apart from adding to the beauty of the women. It is an art, it is considered an art in itself. We have this painting is titled Forms and Motifs. It is a semi-abstract painting but with emblems drawn from popular sculptures, popular African sculptures. But these are female icons, female symbols drawn. This is another painting titled We Are a Family, saying that whatever part of the world you may come from, as long as you are a black woman or black person, we are one. We are a family. We have stone sculptures. This is Oshun. Oshun is a female deity. And this is Olomoyoyo, she with plenty children. Pottery is an art popularly associated with women. So it is here again to add to the beauty of our celebrations. We know our Africa. And Mayor former Prime Minister of Sao Tome, she was also the governor of Central Bank there. May Jemison, American astronaut, the first African-American female to travel into space. Shango Priestess. We all know Shango too. I want to believe it's a Yoruba deity. It's a priestess, the people of Shango. Special Sir Azibwe, Uganda physician and politician. Bethlehem Aleku is an Ethiopian entrepreneur, the founder of Soul River. She has a brand, a shoe brand that is favorably compared even with Adidas and Nike and all. In her environment, she discovered that so many people were unemployed, but they were skilled people. So she borrowed money and started a factory. And today, that brand, that factory that she started, is now a world-class brand. And of course, Kudirat Abiola, she came into prominence when she was agitating for the release of her husband and for the annulment of the 1993 election. And of course, Oprah Winfrey here, the American talk show host and actor, and a popular philanthropist. I mean, she has helped the cause of African, black and African women. She's a foremost human rights activist. Very popular, I believe everybody knows her. And of course, Margaret Echo. She was prominent during the First Republic, a famous human rights activist group. And Nonkulu Leko Yembesi Eta. She's the CEO of the biggest steel company in Africa. We have other center there. Seats. I mean, they are just seats. But beyond being seats, they are also artworks. And they reflect the state of mind at a particular time in history. If you look at the women, this role belongs to our past. It's no longer the reality of African men to women. So some people even say when we say women, but these are facts. We have them in our job. But the situation is no longer say on our women. No longer suppress them. So that is it's not because and we have the modern address today. Something is missing there. There's no way imagine you see modern address and not think of their family. Their family. It shows the devotion. What I'm seeing there is not modern address, but the love of their woman, family, for children, and for the society. So, okay, we have some paintings there from Jamaica. And that was Damian too. A performance during the time of Jamaica. So there are detailed explanation of all the exits.
I think we are moving to the foyer. Let's go to the foyer. Who is leading us to the foyer?